Story 1: The Missing Child. My grandfather wasn't a man of many words. He was always clad in what remained of his military attire from bygone days. He had been a young British soldier, stationed in a remote village in the Swiss Alps during the winter of '43. The village lay quiet beneath a heavy snow that soon trapped us within, as avalanches severed the roads and phone lines, leaving us isolated for the entirety of winter. Communication proved difficult. We hardly spoke German, and the villagers barely understood English, which only deepened the pervasive silence. Until one fateful evening, that silence was broken in the local tavern by a man's desperate outcry. "Was sind unsere Kinder? Where are our children?" In need of a translator to bridge our languages, the man, named Friedrich, was brought to our camp. With him, he carried tales of disappearing children. 3 had vanished since our arrival. Could it be a mishap? The fierce unpredictability of nature? The wilderness around us was a known harbor for beasts. But to lose 3 children? Captain Hamish vowed to find the missing children, and we were galvanized into action. Patrolling the streets nightly under the heavy alpine skies, our breaths visible like spirits in the cold. And then Private Reginald disappeared. A child's absence is a village's quiet terror, but an adult's? The rumors within our ranks sharpened like claws. Predator? No wildlife, not even the imagined wolves that seemed to stalk our cabin walls, could capture a healthy man with such ease. We carried on with our patrols at night, rifle and lantern in hand, piercing the darkness. Then, one pitch-black night, we spotted a figure against the backdrop of an unlit dwelling. It stood there, peering in, an unspoken watcher. When we called out to it to halt, the figure vanished into the night, its movements through the snow not of any human I knew. The pursuit led us to a cavern, a hidden grotto where our voices were swallowed by earth and stone. There, the figure, no longer just a shadow, lashed out fiercely, as if fueled by the darkness itself. Our men fought back against whatever it was before us. After the skirmish had ended, we lit up the cave to uncover a grim truth. There lay Reginald and the children, or what was left of them, after being subject to the macabre feast of a monstrous being. It was the ensuing shared grief that silently united us with the village folk, transcending language barriers and beliefs, as we found a common ground in our mourning. That winter left an indelible mark on us. It wasn't about being English soldiers or villagers from a secluded spot in the Alps, but about standing guard against the dark forces at the fringes of our lit circles. The horrors of the cave went unspoken thereafter, but every man's eyes hid a hint of the abyss, and every child's laughter was a spit in the face of the night's silent watchers. The beast remained unnamed, the whispering snow an accomplice to its deeds, and the mountains, ever so knowing, kept their secrets to themselves. Story 2: Adventures at the Diplomat Hotel. Many years ago, on a tropical rainy dusk, when I first stepped into the hotel named the Diplomat, a cool breeze accompanied by strands of rain greeted me. At that time, I had no idea that this building, located in Baguio City, Philippines, would be so closely entwined with my own story. In the early 20th century, it used to be a devout monastery, with walls imbued with the scent of prayers and the halo of candles. However, the cruel war stained this sacred land with a dark crimson of bloodshed. During World War II, Japanese soldiers trampled through these corridors and ruthlessly massacred all the clergymen and nuns. The grieving and fearful spirits have since built an invisible prison here. After the war, people tried to cleanse the bloody past of the structure with the guise of a sanatorium before turning it into a hotel, hoping the laughter and chatter of travelers could drown out the cries of the past. But the story never quite ended there. My name is Li Hua-san, a writer who studies Asian history. The ironic name of the Diplomat Hotel sparked my curiosity. I decided to stay here for a while to delve into its forgotten history. On the first night of my stay, I heard those sounds often mentioned by the guests. A taut scream pierced the night sky, followed by the banging of closing doors. At first, I attributed these noises to old pipework and the ever-changing weather. There has to be a reasonable explanation, I thought. Yet, over the following days, I personally witnessed that black figure. Every midnight, it would appear at the end of the corridor, standing for a moment before vanishing into the night. I followed its footsteps, wandering through the winding stairs and forgotten rooms. Until that night, I met the woman in white gossamer. She stood in front of the window in my room, her pale face expressionless, but her eyes were full of pleading. She reached out her hand, as if to guide me to see the places she had walked, the disaster she had experienced personally. Following her guidance, I eventually found a diary in the basement of the monastery, recording the last despair of the slaughtered nuns. Every word was like a heavy blow to my heart, those fates unremembered by the world, coldly buried in the shadows of this piece of history. I began my narrative, trying to restore and record all of this. But soon, I found myself trapped in an irresistible journey into nostalgia, and it seemed that the departed souls were writing their unfinished stories through my hand. This hotel, now long abandoned, had become a preferred destination for those brave ghost hunters. And I, Hua San, was just a passerby in a century of solitude for the building, leaving behind only the writings eroded by wind and rain and an endless silence. Continuing on this journey, I often felt a faint yet persistent gaze, as if something was watching me from the shadows in the corner. Daylight could not dispel the fear left by the night. Even in the bustling streets, those unrested souls still clung around me. One day, the sky suddenly darkened, thunderclouds looming overhead, and a storm seemed to be approaching. I decided to return to the hotel to complete the manuscript of the hotel's history. As I walked, I recited the last words of the nuns, their final prayers for life echoing in my mind. I knocked on the weather-beaten door. It creaked open, as if welcoming me back. But this time, as I entered the lobby, the entire space suddenly became still. The silence was suffocating, even the sound of raindrops disappearing abruptly. The disrupted space-time of the war seemed to freeze at that moment, and my heart skipped a beat with worry. I tried to ignore this sudden anomaly and climbed the stairs towards my room. Suddenly, a sharp scream tore through the silence, followed by several thuds of something heavy hitting the ground. I halted, and a strange light leaked from under the door of my room. I swallowed hard and slowly opened the door, hoping to find a reason, telling myself it was just a scare. However, the moment the door opened, the woman in white was no longer just a ghostly apparition. She stood there, staring at me with hollow eyes, her pale face finally showing an expression: deep sorrow and agony. She slowly raised her hand, pointing behind the wall. As I gazed at the wall, I realized a horrific possibility. Some barrier between the brutal history and my writings had been broken. Those souls, originally dormant in the corners of history, were now present in the world through me. A crack split the wall, and cold air and murmurs seeped through. The fissure widened, seemingly forming an invisible mouth, ready to swallow me. I wanted to run, but my body involuntarily moved forward, step by step. As I crossed the threshold of the wall, all sounds abruptly stopped, and I found myself in a completely foreign realm. It was a corridor full of scars, with nuns in blood-stained clothes weeping around me, the atrocity of the Japanese soldiers playing out before my eyes. The wall behind me was no longer a wall but a gate to that terrifying past, and it was slowly closing. Suddenly, the woman in white's voice whispered in my ear, a tender murmur of pity. "Don't be afraid, Hua Senator, your story will be continued by us." The moment the door shut completely, I felt time stop beating. I became a part of the past, the boundaries between my world and theirs forever erased. And those who live within the words are a reality I can no longer touch. Story 3: Ghosts of Normandy. That year, when we decided to travel to France, filled with reverence for history and curiosity for the unknown, I never imagined it would have such a profound impact on my family. I, Jason Parker, a writer ceaselessly exploring history, took my dear wife Elizabeth and our 7-year-old daughter Emily on a drive to the scenic and solemn Normandy to visit the heavy history of World War II there. Upon arriving in Normandy, we were immediately overwhelmed by the calmness of its coasts, where the waves gently brushed the beaches, seemingly whispering tales of past battles' baptism. However, our exploration turned into an unexpected adventure. As dusk neared, we walked through the thick shadows of history, visiting dignified war memorials and silent bunkers. Emily, as lively as ever, started to slow down when the light became mottled, her eyes reflecting an unusual depth. "Daddy, they are watching us," she stuttered, pointing towards an unseen distance. Following her finger, all I could see was the grass swaying in the wind. I frowned, thinking perhaps the historical ambience had touched her young soul. Back home, Emily continued to obsess over these unseen soldiers. She would draw the scenes she claimed to have seen, blurred figures moving between the grass and bunkers as if she had truly witnessed that part of history. Driven by an irresistible curiosity, I began to detail her descriptions. Figures crouching in corners, the firearms in their arms, and their resolute stances against the setting sun. Every detail was bizarre yet vivid, eerily similar to descriptions in history books. Was it a hallucination, or a vision that transcended time and space? I was filled with doubt. As Emily grew, those images gradually ceased to appear in her drawings or her speech. But I knew those once unsettling images were forever branded in her memory. On our last day in Normandy, we decided to revisit those war sites as a farewell to our journey. The sky was filled with dark clouds, the wind carrying the coolness of the previous night's rain. Emily was unusually quiet, gripping my hand firmly with a resolute gaze. That day, instead of following our original route, we were guided by an indescribable force into a secluded area not marked on any tourist guide. There lay a forgotten bunker, entwined with vines and thorns, as if it had not been disturbed by humans since the war ended. Emily suddenly stopped, pointing at the bunker. "They are there, waiting for us." Her voice so faint it was almost hard to catch. Elizabeth looked at me nervously, but driven by curiosity and perhaps a hint of unease, we decided to enter. Inside, a suffocating air surrounded us, and the walls lined with old photos and military items emanated an immense historical weight. At the end of the corridor, a door swung gently as if someone had just passed through. We slowly approached the door, our heartbeats audible. Suddenly, Emily let go of my hand and walked toward the door and pushed it open. Darkness swallowed her figure, leaving behind only a faint light. "Emily!" Elizabeth and I called out in unison, rushing in after her. But what we found was an empty room, with no sign of Emily and no exits. Panic surged through me as I searched everywhere, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. Just when we were about to lose hope, Emily's voice, soft and clear, reached us. "Don't be afraid, Mommy and Daddy. This is their world. I'm just a brief visitor, but they've given me a task, to make people remember." Turning around, we saw a large mural on the bunker's stone wall, depicting the Battle of Normandy in astonishing detail. In one corner of the painting, there was a figure of a little girl, clearly Emily. But when we turned back, intending to find the source of the voice, we found the room had returned to silence and emptiness, and the door that had once been there vanished without a trace. We never found Emily. It was as if she had become one with that mural, forever frozen in time. Police and search teams looked for days, but no clues were found, except for the non-existent door. To this day, the bunkers of Normandy remain an unresolved mystery, and Emily's voice sometimes echoes in my dreams, reminding us not to forget the brave souls who fought for freedom. For Elizabeth and me, we have lost the most precious part of ourselves, yet we've also acquired an eternal mission to ensure that the names and stories of those heroes are remembered, no matter how many years pass. Thus, the story ends in an unpredictable way, leaving behind more questions and thoughts for contemplation. Emily has become an everlasting enigma, her story, like the ghostly soldiers she perceived in history, forever residing in our memories. A few years later, I completed a novel entitled The Ghost Soldiers of Normandy, exploring the blurred lines between memory, history, and reality from a father's perspective. This book is my tribute to Emily's inner world, how her eyes, able to see the shadows of history, silently narrated the tales of another world. To this day, That journey to Normandy remains a topic of deep reflection in our hearts, and an indelible mark in my writings. Indeed, the winds of Normandy have brushed the graves of soldiers and also stirred our perceptions of the world. We hold but a corner of history in our grasp. The rest we leave to time and endless conjecture. The story is without an end. Everyone can find their place within it. And for Emily, it was merely a fantastical chapter before entering adulthood. Every time we return to that Normandy coast, I can still catch a glimpse of that indescribable luster in her eyes.